This is the Comics Alternative, episode 296. Reviews of Scratches, number 2, Now, number 4, and Dick Tracy, Dead or Alive, number 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sterg, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this week's episode, we're going to look at 3 recent titles. We're going to begin with issue number 2, or volume number 2, if you want to call it that, of Scratches. And after that, we're going to look at another anthology, Now, number 4. And then we're going to wrap up with the Allreds and Rich Tommaso's Dick Tracy, Dead or Alive, number 1. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by those wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some mind-blowing specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover, but occasionally you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
That's right, Derek. And if you look right now up on their site, Now number 4, the comic anthology that we're talking about, is up for 35% off, which is a great price.
Wow, that is a good discount. And what better way of introducing yourself, if you're not already familiar with Now, to Now from Fantagraphics. It's a great anthology, and we have discussed it often on the Comics Alternative. So be sure to go to dcbservice.com because they will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs and at incredible discounts. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Hey, Sterg, how's it going with you lately?
Hey, not so bad. Just, running around, chasing little people, reading comics.
Chasing
just the normal
little people. Are you talking about your kids or leprechauns?
Kids right now. Everything's Halloween. That's the, I don't know. We walk around our neighborhood. Everyone's starting to decorate. So our 3-year-old points at every window. He points and he says, Halloween, Halloween, even though there's scary skeleton. Every scary skeleton is Jack from A Nightmare Before Christmas. So I don't know whether to be, I think it's a good thing because he's not afraid of them. But there's a lot of them in our neighborhood right now.
Well, you mentioned Halloween. We should, we don't know exactly yet what specifically we're going to discuss. But one of the things we like to do on the Comics Alternative on our weekly review shows is every October, for the end of the month or around the time of Halloween, is to discuss several either seasonal Halloween titles from various publishers, and then along with that, maybe recent horror titles that may or may not have been timed for late October, because of Halloween. But nonetheless, it's the Halloween spirit. So we've already been discussing what possibilities we would cover. But yeah, we're going to have a Halloween show. And in fact, I think our last episode of October of this year will actually be released on Halloween, the 31st.
See, the timing of it is just, how can we not do that? Yeah,
the timing is, shall I say, scary.
I can't follow that. I'll just do like a Bela Lugosi impersonation and say look, and you can't even look. It's a podcast. But, look into my eye, put in your earbuds, listen closely.
When you say that, it reminds me of, Joe Flaherty on SCTV when he did, what was the Count Floyd?
Yeah.
And he would say, "Ooh, kids, that's scary."
I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going with that from now on. Ooh, kids, that's scary.
So when you take your kids around Halloween trick-or-treating in several weeks, maybe you can dress as Count Floyd.
That's a good question. My wife's going to be a gumball machine, so I need something. Last year I just put on. Yeah, she's inventive. Last year I just put on a witch hat and I said, I'm a witch. So
I think the last time I took my kids trick-or-treating, I dressed as Groucho.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I went out and I didn't smoke it, but I bought a cigar and I had the mustache painted on and my hair slicked back. And I was going around talking about, I don't know, Chico and the secret word.
Nice. Chico needed the money. That's why.
Yeah. That's right. A reference to Drew Friedman.
That's right.
And Gilbert Gottfried. Yeah.
That's right. All of those guys. Yeah. Yeah. Last year we went, it was the first year my kid remembered Halloween, and it was hilarious because for the next 2 weeks afterward, every time we went on a walk, he wanted to go to everybody's door and get something. And we were like, no, it doesn't work that way. You can't go every day. You just go once a year.
Okay, let's go ahead and get into this week's discussion. And this is interesting in that on this episode, we're going to be talking about two anthologies. And I think that they have some similarities, but also they're strikingly different. And the first one we're going to look at is Scratches #2. And this is, I guess, edited, compiled by Joost Swarte. Mm-hmm. Who is Swiss, I believe, creator. Now, have you read any of Swarte's work previously?
I have. I've read there's a collection he came out with through Fantagraphics a few years ago. I read, and he's one of those ones that on their the Conundrum Press website where they solicit the book, they talk about it as a new international anthology in the tradition of Raw. And he was a contributor to Raw way back in the 80s, and I read a lot of those. So I've seen his stuff pretty frequently, I think.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think I was first introduced to Swarte in Raw issues from back in the 80s. And I think that collection that you're referring to is That All There Is?
Yes, that's the one.
Which was published, I think, in 2011. I think. And I remember it was something that on our very first best of, like end of the year episode that Kunka and I did, I think that was one of the books that I had listed as my favorite of that year.
Oh yeah. I love his comics. He's very distinctive style. And, yeah, I remember getting that collection and I just kind of savored it because I would read one or two here and kind of put it aside and read one or two because it's his individual pages are just entire narratives in like one page. So I didn't want to read it all in one shot.
Yeah. And the thing about Swarte's art, and we don't have much of it. And we can talk about that in a minute in this volume of Scratches, but it's kind of a clean style,
right?
But at the same time, there's something much more contemporary to that clean style than you usually see referenced as clean style.
Yeah, and
especially in terms of content.
Yeah, I think it's just I don't know. It looks very modern, even though the style hasn't really changed much in 30 years since I've seen it, but I'm still going to call it modern.
Yeah. Now, I said a moment ago that we don't see much of Swarte's art in this issue or volume of Scratches, but there's one example of this, and this is on the very back cover. And so it's just, one page in essence, even though it's on the back cover. And it's a relatively simple comic. It has a guy leaving what looks like a bakery with a slice of cake, and he's stealing it, and he's whacked on the head for stealing a piece of cake, and then he thinks to himself, well, if I'm going to get hit like this, then maybe I should steal something a little more significant than a piece of cake. And so he goes out and steals a television set from an electronics store. And of course, he's hit on the head even more. And he says, wow, that really hurt. One more won't kill me, but only a big heist would be worth it. And so then he goes to steal a car. He drives away. He's killed in an accident. And then in the very last panel, we see this guy who appears to be in a grave, in a tomb, underneath the ground, watching a TV with a little toy car by him. And he says, got all I need and no one to hassle me.
Yeah, his comics are just, I don't know, they look surreal, but they also sound like commentaries on modern life. A lot of them, that's, I don't know, like kind of like I don't know, there's something ridiculous about them I love. And yeah, the fact that, you know, it's just a non sequitur at the end too. It's a sequitur in a way, but I mean, the panel right before that, I mean, he gets blown up. So he's in pieces, but then somehow he's just all back together and everything's great. And he's in a box. Yeah.
And in fact, maybe the Swarte comic on the back cover would be a good jumping off point in terms of the other contributions in this issue of Scratches, in that, you know, as we were pointing out, there's really not much of a story there. So if you're coming to this anthology
right
with an expectation of comics or illustrative narrative that actually tells a story, you're going to be disappointed. And I think we could say the same to a certain degree, I think a lesser degree, when it comes to Now, which we'll discuss in a minute. But I think especially in this collection, there is a lot of comic art, or just art, maybe not even defined as comics, I guess, that doesn't necessarily tell a story.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I was trying to think about how we were going to talk about this, because it is a collection of so many things. It's like you said, there's some pieces that are more art pieces. There's a couple pieces that are more historical perspectives of certain artists. There's some that are narratives. There's some that are more just aesthetic, I guess. There's even like a page of infographics at the end kind of glued in, which I thought was really cool, because it's like a separate little broadsheet that folds in and out. So like as an object, it's really kind of interesting, and it's got these cool French flaps that have all these book covers on the inside and the outside that, you know, it's like, it's rewarding to read this in a lot of different senses, I think, because it's like got little surprises in it, which I really appreciate that. Just kind of as a physical object, I like this. Just, it's very aesthetically pleasing and interesting to me.
Now, this is the second issue or volume of Scratches, and the copies that you and I have are those that I found at the Conundrum table at Small Press Expo a few weeks ago. And in fact, one of the, I think, highlights for me of Small Press Expo is finally getting to meet the publisher of Conundrum Press, Andy Brown. And so I was talking to him about this or that. We've discussed a lot of Conundrum books in the past, but he had on his table Scratches too. And I had not seen anything from Conundrum that this would be coming out. And he explained to me that this is not a Conundrum publication, but it's something that Conundrum is distributing and selling at various events. And so I got a couple of copies, one for you, one for me. I sent you yours in the mail and thought, maybe this will be something to discuss. And especially given the fact that Swarte is the editor-in-chief of this. So I didn't know that Scratches existed as an anthology until this. And I think you and I were looking up earlier when the first issue or volume of Scratches came out. It was, 2016, I think?
That's correct.
Yeah. And that was interesting. I was looking at the number of the various contributors of the very first issue, and some of the contributors, the same ones that are in this second issue. But even some other people, quite big names, like Chris Ware, apparently. Right.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I know we're going to talk about a couple anthologies, but that was one of the things that kind of stood out to me about this book, is that it kind of had that, I'm not going to say that usual cast of characters, but there's definitely those that presence of those raw contributors. There's still quite a number of them in this book, because Charles Byrne has some pieces, and R. Crumb and his wife, what is her name?
Eileen.
Yeah, that's right.
Kaminsky Crumb. Yeah,
that's right. So they have a piece.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list of contributors on that first issue of Scratches, which I've never seen, but apparently, they're more recognizable names in that first issue,
right,
and at least I see in the second. So, for instance, of the people that I recognize, David B., Robert Crumb, Brecht Evans, who's also in the second issue. Eileen Kaminsky Crumb is also in there. Joost Swarte, Art Spiegelman is also a part of this. And Sampler Man. I know of Sampler Man from Kush. He's contributed some things to Kush. So, there are some recognizable names there, but most of the people who contributed to the first issue, I don't know their work. And I think that's especially the case with this second issue of Scratches. Of the people that are listed in the table of contents, Charles Burns, Brecht Evans, I recognize, and then Robert and Eileen Kaminsky Crumb.
Yeah.
And then, Joost Swarte. Outside of that, everyone else, this is my first exposure to their work.
Yeah, same here. And there's a Frank King, a little historical piece on Frank King, and we know him from Gasoline Alley.
Right.
But this is work prior to that, which is I thought was interesting, as a perspective. I don't know. I love, I think, collections of work like this because it just does so many different things. Like it's a history, like it's introducing work that we've not seen before, artists we haven't seen before, or even styles or formats. Because not all of these are straight comics. Some of these are, some of them are more tonal to me. Some of the pieces, some of them, some of them are, these by Henning Wagenbreath. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. It's those kind of one-page comics that have
9 images that take on a particular quote-unquote
like
theme. Yeah.
Right, like people that hate cucumbers. And there's, 16 random images of people and, their reasons for why they hate cucumbers. They're too cheap, they're too crooked, they're too vegan, they're too dirty, they're too green, and et cetera. Yeah. But, there's not really, it's not a narrative, but I don't know. There's something about that kind of, art that just, it reminds me of other things that I really think are pleasant. Like those, an 8-Ball, Dan Klaus. I remember he would just have pages of things that I like, or Evan Dorkin. I think in Dork would just have like pages of things that he liked. And it'd be like, okay, so you just look at it and you kind of get like a feeling about aesthetic. But this is just kind of weird. He's got another one where he's just got factories and all these weird, surreal looking buildings and, little descriptions about what it is that they manufacture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has another one I'm looking on page 42 is themed summer machinery. And so we have a series of 9 images of various kind of fantastical pieces of machines. And one is a back garden snail vaporizer, a heat wave controller, a motorized pollen picker, so on and so forth. So, yeah, it is kind of strange. And so there are occasions, you're right, where we do get contributions from artists that definitely don't tell a story, that may be more a showcasing of their art, in this case, the sense of humor, more than story. But then there are others that at least tell a little bit of story. And I'm thinking in particular of, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Brecht Vanderbroeke, who does a series of 1-page strips, in essence, titled Shady Bitch.
Oh, yeah.
And then Shady Bitch is not a woman, but a guy who, I'm assuming because this individual has a beard, who gets into these weird situations or is the center of attention. So, for instance, the first Shady Bitch piece that we see, which is on page 48, he's around a crowd of people who are looking at a work of art, and he's wondering why everyone's paying attention to the work of art that's on the wall instead of him. And so he takes out a pen and he draws around himself to where he becomes kind of the center in what he's drawn. So it's almost like a focus on him. And he says, I guess the punchline you would call it, according to the golden ratio, the center of attention should always be me. And so it's these little things, kind of almost like gag strips. Shady Bitch. And the one right after that is Shady Bitch is talking to a guy who has these incredibly long legs. And he asks, what happened to you? And the guy, who seems to have what looks like a dunce cap on, says, the world looks so sad and desperate. I was trying to bring all the people together by embracing the whole world. I wanted to hug everyone at the same time, so I had surgery to enlarge my arms. And then he asks Shady Bitch, what happened to you? And as Shady Bitch is running away, he says, I don't want to talk about it. And as he's running away, you see that his penis is dragging on the ground. It's elongated.
Oh, yeah.
So just weird things like that. So strange, strip-like humor. Now, there are some stories in here. There are some comics in here, pieces that do, I think, contain a narrative of some sort. And one of the earliest examples of that is Tobias Schalken. And I think this piece is titled The Lights of Home. Right.
And that one stood out to me only because, like you said, it was one of the few pieces of narrative, like a dedicated, definite, like you look at it and you go, okay, this is a story and I can follow that. And that's one of the things that I was going to just ask you about too, about how you read an anthology like this. Because what I did is I kind of flipped it, and there were certain things like those one-pagers that I said, okay, I can handle this. And then I kind of, I read a piece here and I read a piece there. I didn't really read it front to back. And I went back, but that was one of the ones I read because I looked at it and I thought, okay, I'm familiar with this. I'm going to go with it. And it was, I really enjoyed, enjoy maybe isn't the right word for it, but I appreciated, that story. I really enjoyed that Lights of Home because it was kind of like a slice of life of a young woman ruminating on her past, and kind of, she's living with her mom, she's walking her dog, and she's just kind of thinking about her mom and dad's relationship and her relationship with her little sister who's not at home anymore, who's gone far away. And I don't know, it just kind of struck me as like a kind of understated kind of narrative, I guess, but very internal. And I don't know, it kind of reminded me a lot of some of the earlier Optic Nerve kind of stuff that Adrian Tamiani did.
That's, I hadn't even thought of that, but you're right. There is something very Tamiani-esque about Schalken's story, The Lights of Home.
Yeah, and not to detract from this, it's not derivative or anything like that. It's just, it's similar, the way it's aesthetically put together and maybe thematically a little bit, just that kind of internal, monologue going on. She's walking and she's doing things and things are going on, and, she does some, she's thinking about piano lessons she took when she was a kid and how that went. And, she just occurs to her to go to that house where she took those lessons and, ring and see if that woman's there. And, she's not there because, that would maybe be weird, but it's a very strange panel, that voice from the intercom on page 9, where she's, she's like, excuse me, never mind. Okay. And then there's like a beat where it's quiet and the voice comes back and says, you could still come up if you'd like. Then there's another beat and she's like, no, thank you. But it's like, there's a whole lot of drama in those 6 panels.
Yeah. Good point. It struck me that the Lights of Home is, I don't know if this is the best way of describing it, but I think it's probably the most, let's say, traditional comic or illustrative contribution, if we want to call it that, to this issue of Scratches. Others either are like almost absurdist pieces. You mentioned the the Frank King pieces.
Right.
And so there are other kind of historical contributions here as well. And we should point out that not is the majority of Scratches #2 made up of more contemporary work, but also older stuff. You know, for instance, there is that Frank King retrospective, as brief as it is. But there are also some older contributions that seem, I don't know, very contemporary to me. And one thing that stands out is the creator name, and I guess I'm pronouncing this correctly, Typex, Typex.
Right.
And I don't know what the title of this piece is. Is it Andy and Eddie? But this is apparently a comic or a series of semi-narrative illustrations that were created between 1965 and 1966. So we get a little context here about Typex, who is from Amsterdam. And it starts off, or I guess on the second page, with what looks like a series of cards that someone can cut out, because there's an image of a character or an individual on the front. And if you turn the page, you get a little bit of their biography. So we get what I'm assuming is various fictional members of Typex's story world: Fuzzy Sedgwick, Alice Sedgwick, Bobby Sedgwick, and Minty Sedgwick. But then there are also some real-life historical figures that are a part of the cards as well that you can cut out. Bob Dylan, Albert Grossman, Nico. So, I mean, it's interesting. And at first I thought, okay, well, this is just interesting art with the cutout cards. But then you turn the page, and then beginning on 35, you get a story about, it looks like it's titled Francis, but I guess it's about Fuzzy Sedgwick. And it seems to be narrated by Edie, I think.
Right.
And it's a little unclear. And it's kind of a absurdist story that meanders, but not in a negative way, right? It just goes from one action to another, and these actions don't necessarily have anything to do one with the other. And so, I mean, it's just kind of a strange story, but incredible art.
Yeah, and that struck me too, because it kind of encapsulated the whole book for me in a way, because it's a weird, like you said, it's narrative. It's got some kind of historical looking pieces. I love that page of, cutout cards. It's like trading cards for these people in this story. And they're all, I mean, I've done a little digging around, because this one I looked this guy up on, Lambic, the website. And there's also a thing where it just occurred to me to look now, but one of the things I thought was helpful is that there's biographies in the back. So I looked, and this Typex is, or Typex, I'm going to go with that, has been making comics since the 80s. And apparently, according to Lambic, this is his, magnum opus is to do a biography of Andy Warhol and Edie Sedgwick. And so, yeah. So this is actually, I think this is work from some larger work or some potential grand graphic novel. Or I don't even know if it's going to be a graphic novel, because it's got lots of different elements. I mean, there's a page that looks like it's from a gossip magazine on page 40, about Baby Jane Holzer. And then, then the narrative gets kind of weird and surreal. You get a whole bunch of people like taking pills. And you get Bob Dylan lyrics, and you get some Tom Jones lyrics. Yeah. So it's like, it's tonal in a way, it's narrative in a way. It's kind of got features from like the trading cards and the little one-page romance thing that look like they're from different genres. So it's like a genre mashup. It's got the weird, other book covers and things like that. So it looks, I don't know, to me it looks like almost like something like a faux history even.
Yeah.
Or maybe not a faux history, but like it's moving in that direction. I really liked it because it's just a lot of different elements. I think it's emblematic of the whole book, just because it's just got so many different things going on. As an art piece, as comics, as history, as multimedia, so I think it kind of hits a lot of different categories or aesthetics, or I don't know, just sensibility. There's a lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good way of putting it, that Type X story is kind of a amalgamation of a variety of different things that we see coming out from different creators in this issue of Scratches. You know, as we mentioned, you know, some of these may tell a story, some are more historical, some expository, some are more like gag strips, absurdist humor, just different things. In fact, I just opened my copy to almost the exact middle. I guess this is pages 68 and 69. And on 68, I think it's the first installment of what I guess we could title Lost and Found Loves by Francois Ayroles. Ayroles, and I may be mispronouncing that name. And they're about, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these one-pagers throughout this issue of Scratches. And in some ways, they're kind of like a gag strip, right? Because we have a guy who is at this window with a sign above it that says Lost and Found Loves, and people come up to the window and they're asking if anyone has found their lost love. So in this first one, this guy comes up and says, "I've lost my love." And the guy in the window says, "Describe it, please." And he says, "It was so pure, so perfect, like a rare diamond." And then the guy at the window asks, "Can you be more specific?" And then the guy goes into more detail and says, "Well, you know, I have something that almost fits that description, but not exactly." And then the guy slaps his head towards the end and says, "Oh, wait, now I remember where I left it. What an idiot. Sorry to bother you." And there are other encounters like this in these one-pagers that Ayroles contributes to this issue.
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, so that kind of almost gag strip, one-pager, is something that you'll find in this issue. But then right next to it is a piece by Eric Kriek. And again, I'm not sure how you pronounce that name, is Kriek. And this, I'm assuming the title is Little Sadie.
Right.
And this is another contribution that I think is close to traditional storytelling in terms of narrative. It's about a guy who kills, and this is not a spoiler because you see this on the very first page, a cowboy who shoots his love, a woman named Sadie, or Little Sadie, and leaves town. He is filled with regret. He ends up turning himself in at one point and spends the rest of his life in prison, telling the story of killing Little Sadie.
Right, and turning it into maybe a blues song.
Yeah, exactly. Which you would expect with something like this.
I was going to say, it's almost like it's a murder ballad, but a comic.
Yeah, a murder comic ballad.
That's it.
But then you have other contributions that are more, let's say, pure art than anything. For instance, we get a series of illustrations from, and again, I'm not sure how you pronounce this name, but I guess this may be Japanese, Samki, S-A-M, and then K-I. And these look more like paintings than definitely comics. And so you have text that is both in English and, I'm assuming, Japanese.
Yeah, those stood out to me because they're very striking. I mean, those full-page illustrations that are mostly urban landscapes, and they all have little legends or captions at the bottom that kind of, it's almost like a geography book, maybe, or something like that, but a beautifully rendered geography book about, creating sea salt and other things and buildings. That's to me one of the things that this one in particular stood out to me because of trying to make sense of this, thinking about this as a kind of an art piece and a series of comics and kind of the things that you are talking about, because there are, those whimsical kind of, other comics that are more surreal or just ridiculous, or gag strips, like you said. And I think Shady Bitch is probably the best example of those for me, because they remind me a lot of, when I read Raw, one of the things I used to love, I think the thing I looked forward to the most in Raw was Cowboy Hank. I love those comic strips. I don't know if you remember them, but he's kind of like this blonde character who's very hulking and kind of traditionally looks almost like a superhero, but just does ridiculous things. Like he's eating spaghetti and it just goes on for forever. And I don't know, it's surreal in a way that Shady Bitch is surreal to me too. And that character just looks like kind of like Olive Oil and Bluto and Alice the Goon all kind of got put into DNA mixer and made some kind of being.
And by the way, I am glad that you mentioned Alice the Goon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's definitely, well, whatever.
I love Popeye.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
Popeye.
Whatever Shady Bitch is a complicated being. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm looking at another contribution in Scratches number 2, and this is by Wasco, Wasco, and I'm not sure how you pronounce that name, but Wasco, I'll say it that way, was also a contributor to the first issue of Scratches.
Right.
And Wasco's contribution in issue number 2 is a 4-pager that presents these images of what looks like penguins.
Right.
And there's not a title for this piece. And so, I mean, I don't know if you would call it penguins, and I'm assuming that these are penguins. They look like penguins. And we see penguins in different contexts, from different perspectives. In fact, on the first page, there seems to be an image of a penguin underwater. And then on page 91, the second page of this piece, some penguins hanging from a tree.
Like they're branches, though. They're not.
Yeah.
They're in the tree.
Yeah, exactly. And then just, again, other images of penguins in other contexts. So what does it mean? What kind of story is it telling, if any? Who the hell knows? But
right.
Again, that's not what this kind of anthology is about.
No. And it's like, yeah, that's interesting too, because it's like 4 pages with 4 groups of penguin arrangements on each page. So it's like, I don't know, penguin 16 ways or something like that. But one of the things that stood out to me too, this being a piece of art and a lot of it being whimsical, I mean, not all of it is whimsical, because for me, one of the things that really stood out was on page 20. I'm going to try Theo the Feeder. Those paintings of Syria and Aleppo in particular. And it's kind of like, Baba Amar, and talking about, kind of historical pieces and trying to document, like he strikes me as kind of like a Joe Sacco type, who's a journalist trying to document what's going on, or in part, but I think from his descriptions, he talked about how he's been going there for 10 or 15 years, at first as an archaeologist and then kind of as an artist going back and drawing things. And he's kind of like a documentarian in a way that, I think is important, being that maybe there's not news people there or photographers in there, but he's documenting destruction. He's documenting troops. He's documenting kind of the people there. And to me, that was a very, a lot of this book is whimsical or just surreal or weird. But that one struck me as very sobering and, contemporary and journalistic in a way, that a lot of the other book isn't. But I mean, to me, it just stood out, but just because of its content and its sensibility.
It adds to the variety that we've been discussing, that this is not just an anthology of similar kinds of comics or illustrations,
right?
But they do different things. They have different functions. They are coming across in a variety of different contexts and ways. And so, I really do appreciate that. So you do have the, I guess, weightier, more hefty historical journalistic aspect of Defater, set alongside some of the more whimsical contributions. And it's interesting that after Defater's piece, we get a 2-page comic called John Ego, MD. And this is by Charles Guthrie. And it's, it's quite striking. I mean, it's very colorful, and it's about a doctor who we only see him in his tidy whities, and his name is John Ego, MD. And so he's the narrator here. He says, I am John Ego, MD. When I'm not busy fixing people, I like to listen to my fantastic brain. And it shows him with a stethoscope held up to his forehead. And so a guy comes in and says, Dr. Ego, I need your help. Basically, he says, my daughter was bitten by a cartoon bat named Karen. And of course, the title of this piece is John Ego, MD, introducing Karen, the cartoon bat. And so the doctor, John Ego, goes over to this guy's place and sees that his daughter, who has a really long neck, has been bitten, but it's a cartoon bat. And so the real life John Ego can't stitch up the wounds. He has to illustrate himself and then stick his fingers through the illustration in order to fix the wound. I mean, really weird stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, there's a punchline at the very end when someone else comes to Dr. Ego and says, help, my eye got switched by a bat drawn in manga style named Jill. And we see that this guy has one eye that does have that kind of moe-looking eye.
Right. Yeah.
Da-dumps.
Exactly. That cracked me up. But actually, the panel before that's what got me about his unhygienic stitching process, where he uses his tidy whities as the thread for closing her stitches, which is not ideal, I'm guessing. But in the field, I think you do what you have available. Use what you got.
Now, one of the pieces toward the end of this issue of Scratches is by a couple of creators that we're both very familiar with, and this is Robert Crumb and Aline Kaminsky-Crumb, right? Titled "The Aline Documentary." Aline and Bob in the Aline Documentary. What did you think of this one?
I've read lots of different versions of this one. I think they're kind of going back and forth. I think it was clever in the way that they're playing off of the Crumb documentary and her saying, "Well, where's my due?" But I don't know. There's ways where I think I've seen this kind of thing before from them. It's like that conversation piece, and I don't know. I like it. It strikes me kind of like a long time ago when Pete Bagg did. What was that? Was it Weirdo? Did he take over Weirdo after Crumb?
Yes, I believe
way
so, yeah.
back in the day. And I remember reading an interview with him talking about people submitting work that were kind of like expected to be in the anthologies because they were friends with Crumb. And one of the hardest things he had to deal with was telling people, no, like, this isn't where we're going anymore. So you can't, Spain is not publishing in this anymore. And, Spain taking that very personally. And to me, it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's a Crumb and Kaminsky Crumb comic. And I've seen them before. And I'm entertained because it's kind of like looking at, kind of two bickering people, kind of like almost sitcom-y, and not quite sitcom-y because it's a little bit more adult than that. But I don't know. There's a part of me. It's like, okay, well, you're friends and you're a huge name in the field and in the history of comics. And I get it. Or you're both huge names. So you're in here. But to me, it's kind of like, okay, they're just talking at each other. Like, it doesn't, I don't know. There's times I loved his work, but lately I just think it's like the comics don't do anything. They just kind of talk at each other. I'm of a similar mind. And one of the reasons why I ask you your thoughts of this 2-page Aline and Bob in the Aline documentary, I have to say that of not all, but I think most contributions, this is the one that resonated with me the least. Or one of the ones that resonated with me the least. And I think one of those reasons may be because I'm not the biggest fan of Aline Kaminsky-Crumb. And I know that for those who are really into alternative comics, that is verboten thing to say. Right. It's just, I've never really enjoyed or appreciated much her style, both in terms of the illustration and also the turn that her stories take, the narrative lines and whatnot, the representation of herself. I think it's okay, but I easily tire of it, let's say. I'm much more appreciative of Robert Crumb's work, especially visually, the aesthetics of that. But he's not known as the best storyteller. Right.
Much more of an illustrator than someone who engages in cohesive long-form narrative. Mm-hmm. So, I've read Aline Kaminsky-Crumb and Robert Crumb's Dirty Laundry, right? The comics where they, each contributed something. Those are interesting enough, but I think that after reading Dirty Laundry, then that's about all of that style that I need.
Right.
And then this just seems... Again, I don't mean to demean this by saying the same old, but it doesn't strike me as anything or much new. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why, of the various contributions in this issue of Scratches, that just struck me as one of the ones that resonated the least with me.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, it's not necessarily the creators and what they're saying. It's just that, I don't know, I've seen comics like this before. I'm thinking of, was it James Kolchaka and Jeffrey Brown did Conversation? They did a couple comics where they kind of went back and forth talking at it, like similar type setup. And to me, it's like, is it an essay? Is it comics? It's kind of an essay in comic form, but it's not very, I don't know, it's not very engaging to me kind of as a format. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily the creators or their voices per se. It's just that there's something about this entire, I don't know if it's a genre even, but it just doesn't do anything for me. And like you say, like it doesn't resonate. It's here's his view, here's her view, here's this thing. It's just like a conversation. And I don't know. There's so many more interesting things you can do with comics, I think, than just kind of have flat dialogue and people talking. I mean, he's eating chips. I mean, that's kind of like the background. But it's just fine. But I don't know. It just doesn't. It's the way it's delivered, I think. It just seems to me like something that it'd be easy for two creators to kind of do. Like, to me, it seems like attractive in terms of, as a creator, like, okay, I'll draw myself on this side, you draw yourself on this side, and we'll just kind of fill in the words and we'll have a conversation. And I'm not trying to make my comics making abilities are nil. So I'm not nearly as accomplished. And I don't think that actually the Crumbs are probably listening and thinking, oh, these people, let's take them to task. They're in France and they don't care.
Of course, we're being presumptuous, assuming that any of these creators are listening to us talk about their work.
Exactly. I have no illusion of that, but I just, and it just doesn't strike me as the most interesting comic. I mean, there's a lot of things in this book that are interesting and engaging in different ways. And it just seems like, okay, he's a big name and he's contributed in the past. So let's call him up and we'll get a couple pages out of him and there we go.
Yeah. But I think overall I am really impressed with Scratches, and it was a wonderful find at this year's SPX. And if our listeners want to find out more about Scratches, the magazine, then they can go to the website Scratches Magazine, and that's one word, scratchesmagazine.com. Apparently, issue number 2 came out. I guess it debuted at TCAF, and it's not at. So it's not been long since this is out. On their website, though, I don't see a way to purchase a copy. Have you seen how to get a
Conundrum Press? Conundrum Press has a way to order it. If you look up on their website, they have a cart. It's $30. It says it came out in April, according to them, but there's a kind of different things because it says April on the website, but that was posted July 4th. So I don't think it came out in April if it came out in July.
Yeah, I see what you're referring to here. Yeah, you can get it through Conundrum. I just pulled up their website. So, as I mentioned at the beginning when we first started to discuss issue number 2 of Scratches, that, I got our copies at the Conundrum table where I met Andy Brown for the first time, and he was telling me that they don't publish it, but they distribute it. So apparently, I think that's, the only way for North American readers to get a copy is through Conundrum, and their website is conundrumpress.com.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I was kind of struck because I was like, it's not even on Amazon. It's like, it doesn't exist, but
yeah,
that's wrong thinking.
Sterg, you want to move on to the second title that we're going to be discussing this week? Another anthology?
Another anthology. It's not called another anthology, though. It's called Now Number 4.
That's right. And one of the things that we have made it a point to do on the Comics Alternative, and I'm assuming we'll continue to do so, is to discuss every issue of Now that comes out.
I'm up for that.
Yeah. And this is an anthology that's edited by Eric Reynolds at Fantagraphics. And it started last fall, I believe it was.
I think you're right.
And in fact, I'm holding issue number 1 in my hand right now. And again, we have devoted episodes, or at least a part of certain episodes, to every issue that has come out. And some of these issues of Now have similar contributors. So, for instance, one of the contributors in issue number 4, Tommi Parrish, has been previously published in this. And then others have as well who are contributors to the most recent, like Nick Thornburg. But then others may be first-time people in Now, such as, I think, if I remember correctly, Theo Ellsworth.
Okay.
Who does a lot of work for Secret Acres. And he has a piece toward the very back of issue number 4 of Now called What Are You Doing? I think it's a one-pager. I don't remember him being in a previous issue of Now, but some of the contributors, you can see pieces from them across 2 or more issues. Some are just in one issue. But, I mean, it is in some ways kind of like Scratches. It's a hodgepodge. Although I will say that more pieces in Now tend to be what I would call more traditional storytelling comics than what we find in Scratches.
Sure. And I there's one of those questions I had for you too, kind of what makes we often talk about what makes a good first issue. But I was also kind of wondering your thoughts on what makes a good anthology of comics, because there's been a number of them and they're not all, well, I don't know. What do you think about that?
That's a really good question. And I guess my answer is going to be a little equivocal. It depends. Because I think Now is an incredible anthology, but one of the things that makes it so striking is that it's kind of like, we were talking about Scratches. It's a collection of different things. Okay. And I appreciate that. Another thing that may make a successful anthology, which we can see in Now, is the introduction of new creators along with people that I, as a reader, may already recognize. So, for instance, I know the work of Theo Ellsworth. I know the work of Roman Muradov. But I may not know the work of, let's say, Brian Blomworth, who has a really good piece toward the beginning called Pray for Piano Land, which is quite absurdist. So I like the introduction of new creators along with people that I already recognize. And so that can make a successful anthology. Another thing that, at least in my book, would make a successful anthology is when things are brought together effectively in a thematic way. So, if there is an anthology devoted to a particular social cause or genre or what have you, that can work really well. Now, with Now, we don't get anything like this, right? There's no thematic or cultural cohesion that goes into all the pieces that make up Now number 4. Or any issue of Now. But it's, for me, what makes it so enticing and exciting is, again, bringing together new and established artists, a variety of styles, a variety of storytelling methods that can be really engaging. And so I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and for me, it's, I have similar thinking. I think an anthology, it depends on what the anthology, how it's meant to be themed, how it's meant to be, set up. And, Scratches to me is gorgeous in that it's gorgeous in that I like it as an object, like I said. Plus it's oversized. It's a huge book. So it features those art pages very well. What I appreciate about Now is like you said, it covers a wide gamut of creators. It's more traditional comics in general. Like, I'm not going to say these are, they're the like Sunday comics or something that, you sit down and it's easy reading. But they tend to be more narrative than Scratches did. But what I also appreciate about this is one of the things that you said. I think there were only 2 or 3 people whose work I was familiar with. So to me, this is like a whole lot of new types of comics and a whole lot of different voices of comics that I really haven't run into before. So I really appreciate getting introduced to a whole lot of that. Plus it's in a nice format it's like $10. I mean, that's if you can get it full price, it's $10. So, if you can find it less from that, in other venues. So to me, it's like a lot of interesting, modern, like contemporary creators, and it's relatively cheap. So it's like something that I think, can be passed around, can be easily, suggested, or, you can get people to look at these things. And like you said, like, to me, I didn't think that this was there. There wasn't any theme in Now other than it's Now. But there was a lot of work in here that I agree with you. It just kind of stood out to me as, that Pray for Pianoland story I really liked, because it's like a weird, surreal, people selling bath water at the farmer's market and weird shrimp and pianos. The coloring, the art styles were phenomenal. There's a lot of stories. I don't know if it was an official theme, but there seemed to be a lot about people's mental states, or maybe I'm not going to say mental illness because it's never really stated that way, but there's a whole lot of like looking into people's thinking and their brains, and they're being reflective and trying to figure out things about their lives. And I don't know. I'm not trying to be a psychologist with this. But there was a lot of that in this book for me, which I didn't think it was a bad thing. I think it was pretty awesome in general, and it went all over the place. One of the stories that stood out to me was on, what's it called? It was called The Absolute Truth on page 45.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
That was one that just was a strange, like kind of like a Turtles all the way down kind of story. Like, I'm looking for meaning. I'm going to go find, the comics character goes and finds the creator, steps out of the comic, right? And finds the creator and asks the creator about, what things mean. And the creator's not very helpful. So he says, okay, well, we must meet your God then. And so the comic character grabs him, and then they go up to the next level. And then they end up kind of at a God convention, talking to lots of different gods.
Yeah. Every creator has his, her, or its own God. So every creator has a creator, and they just keep deferring up to the creator, who doesn't ultimately have the answer that they may be looking for. They end up at this convention that lasts for eons, it seems.
Right.
I'm glad that you mentioned this. And this is by Diego Agrimbo and Lucas Varela. I'm sorry. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing those names. It's actually translated by Matt Madden.
Right.
Whose name I think I know how to pronounce.
Yeah.
And to me, this was one of the outstanding finds in this issue of Now.
Yeah, for me too.
The Absolute Truth.
That was one of the things, and I was going to make a bad Matt. We can pronounce his name 99 different ways if we try.
Yeah, there you go.
But
and for those who know his work, got that joke. And
I'm not even explaining it. Don't explain it.
No. Look it up, my friend.
That's right.
If you're listening and you don't know what that joke is. But, another find for me in this issue is The Cave by Matthias Lehmann. And I can't remember if Lehmann has been in a previous issue of Now. I can't recall. But The Cave is, it's a long-ish story. In other words, it's one of the longer ones. It's in black and white, and it is wordless.
Right. But
there's something about the wordlessness and the black and white that just lended an elegance to this story. It, in essence, appears to be like a grandmother, an older woman who is doing her own thing. She's visited by her grandchild and maybe daughter or daughter-in-law. And then after the family leaves, she goes to bed, and then she has what appears to be a dream of some sort. We're not entirely sure. But I mean, it's a story that doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, but I think that's part of its elegance.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I liked. I connected to it in a way because it's an unsettling story, and it left me puzzled too because it's got these, like you said, those dreamlike qualities along with these mundane scenes, and the way it resolved just left me puzzled. Like, is this real? Is this not real? Is this some commentary on some other demon she's wrestling with? Because I mean, I don't want to know how much we talk about or give away, but the fact that she kind of goes down into the basement and then there's this mysterious pool, which that doesn't seem, here we have this is a connection that doesn't really connect, but it being Halloween, we have a movie theater here that's showing Universal monster movies. And I just saw Creature from the Black Lagoon this weekend. So it was like that kind of like, she's just got this little pool and kind of waded into this dark lagoon that just happens to be in her basement. But there's a wine cellar down there too, it seems. And one of the things that struck me, her drinking alone at some point after everyone leaves the house. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but then she kind of goes down into the cellar and there's that pool. And then I kind of thought about what this is and trying to make some kind of connection to reality, maybe. And I was trying to wonder if it was something where maybe she's wrestling with some other demon and, maybe she's alcoholic. Maybe she's down there and that's where the thing is. And it's kind of visualized in a more dreamlike way than in, not showing her chugging down a bunch of bottles of wine or something like that. And then kind of the remorse that looks like it finishes with and what that is. I don't know if I'm over explaining it because part of the beauty of this is, like you said, it's wordless. It's got a lot of interesting imagery, a lot of things to take in and kind of just process.
It's interesting your take on this because I was not attending to the things that you were pointing out. So, for instance, on page 100 of the story, or in issue number 4 of Now, we see her after the family leaves making dinner and then opening a glass of wine and then having the wine with her dinner. Now, we don't see her with the wine for any longer than 4 panels, which is about the same amount of time we see her doing other things. And so I don't think that, at least in my reading, extra narrative weight was given to her drinking. And it's not as if she's chugging it at home by herself.
Oh, right.
I mean, she's having dinner. I am curious, though, about that pool in the basement. I don't necessarily know if it represents in any way some kind of dark side to her that we may see that may or may not be linked to, certain habits that she may have.
Right.
The way that I read this was as a dream. That being the case, I saw the pool and her getting into it probably in a more Freudian way, because many times when, at least you hear in terms of Freudian analysis from what I understand, many times when people are in a pool or dive into a pool or are swimming, there is something sexual. And I mean sexual in the broad Freudian sense, right? Not necessarily, linked to doing the down and dirty, but it's, Freud's understanding of sex, again, broadly defined. And so there may be something going on there. And that pool in her basement may or may not be real. I mean, I think it's a dream because on that last page, 103, we see her getting back into bed after having been in this pool in her basement that seems, unusual. Oh, yeah. She gets back into bed wet and she goes to sleep. But then we see in the third to the last panel, her waking up apparently dry. Right. And she, pulls up her covers and notices what seems to be something wet, almost as if she wet her bed, and then she puts her hand over her eyes. Now, is that wetness? I'm not sure. Was that a dream she had? Is that wetness from her time in the pool? Or did she wet herself in the middle of this dream and then realizes it when she wakes up? We don't know. So, again, I keep coming back to the word elegant when I'm describing this comic, The Cave. I think part of its elegance, in addition to the wordlessness and the black and white, is also the ambiguity.
Oh, yeah, and I agree. And the alcoholism thing was just me thinking about what could this possibly be. And it's, I think I put it on a very specific item, but like you said, it could be any kind of personal demon or thing that was she's wrestling with in some sense. And like you say, it's very open for interpretation. It's very open for analysis and just thinking about it. But it's also very resonant in a lot of ways. It's very easy to kind of empathize with this woman and what she's kind of going through, I think. And because, like you said, it's the storytelling is so open-ended and it's familiar yet but strange at the same time. So I really appreciated that story too. It was one of the standouts for me in this book. And it's in black and white, which kind of strikes as a contrast with a lot of the other stories in this book, which a lot of them are vibrant, or at least pastel colored. I mean, most of the book is full color. That one being black and white is also striking. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the one that follows that, it's not in black and white, but it's monochromatic, right? It's only in like the kind of lighter green tone here. And this is David Alvardo's After School Special. And this is something else that I really enjoyed in this issue of Now. Not so much for some of the reasons that we were discussing, Layman's The Cave. But I think the story is something it's rather humorous, but also something that, I think people can relate to, either people who are currently young having to deal with parents, but also people who are older who remember what it was like dealing with parents. And basically this story is a guy who's picked up by his mother from school, and she wants to hang out with him and be his friend. And he's wondering, why does she want to be my friend? Why can't she just be my mother? And so she said, let's go out and get something to eat. So they go to a place called Twin Dragon for the early bird special. And so they go there. And so the Twin Dragon, I mean, I was assuming that it's a Chinese restaurant given the name. Doesn't necessarily look that way because there's a live band that's playing there and playing, I guess, Led Zeppelin covers.
Right.
And
everything a teenager loves.
Yeah, exactly. And the people, as the teenager is looking around at the other customers, it just seems really sad. You know, there is a soldier or someone in a uniform who's there with a woman, maybe his wife or girlfriend. She's crying for some reason. We don't know why. There's another guy who is eating there that looks riddled with a variety of different diseases. Another guy he notices who just looks completely screwed up. And the boy's reaction to looking at him is just, Jesus Christ. Yeah. Then he goes into the bathroom and finds a bottle of anal Fisher cream.
Yeah. And he picks it up.
And he picks it up. Like, what the hell? And then he comes out, and as if that weren't bad enough, the band has started, and his mother and the other sorry individuals in the restaurant get up and start dancing. Yeah.
And that's the kicker. It's like, to me, it's it's a grotesque story, but it's also kind of that, like you said, that kind of adolescent embarrassment that you have sometimes about what your parents are doing and what you're thinking about what they're doing and why you don't want to be there. And this is just, it's like, it just keeps escalating to me. Right. Although to me, it's hard not to think of the anal fissure cream as kind of the peak of the escalation. But I don't know. Maybe a Zeppelin cover band is worse. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a big question. Which is worse, a Zeppelin cover band or anal Fisher cream?
Right, or an anal's. Maybe that's their name. That would be. But yeah, a Zeppelin cover band playing a restaurant.
Yeah. But the story that follows that after school special is by the French creator J.C. Menu, and I'm not sure that's how you pronounce his name, but it's spelled like menu. Right. I'm assuming it's menu. Maybe my lame French accent. But apparently Menu, and I wasn't aware of this, was one of the founders of l'Association. And so this is, I think, was it last issue that we had an installment of this kind of diary SOS suitcases?
Yeah, he was in the prior issue too.
Yeah. So we have a second installment of this, And we have, I guess, the protagonist, Manu, who is going about various things, and he encounters people that he has known in the past, people, who were a part of L'Association and others as well. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's even an appearance by the actor Gérard Depardieu.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know who some of these figures were, then one of the things that Manu does provide at the very end of this longish contribution is some notes about who these characters are. So if you look at the very end of SOS Suitcases, at least in issue number 4, this is on page 125, he gives us a rundown of who some of these figures are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like this story a lot. It actually, I did not know who J.C. Manu was either, which shame on me for not knowing. But this is one of those also kind of surreal stories about the traveler, and, he gets to a flea market and then suddenly realizes that somebody is selling his suitcase and its contents and wants him to prove who he is. And he's like, but he wants him to go find a serial number so that he can match up and claim his suitcase. But that is a strange beginning situation to deal with.
Yeah, it's like if this is something like a memoir or diary comic, it's a surreal or dreamlike one.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And meetings and people kind of get thrown together, and it's got weird identity politics going on. Like, he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know who he's talking to. And some of the people morph into other people. And then he realizes suddenly that, oh, they're all the same person. Mm-hmm. So it's Frank Woodring's in it too. Or not Frank, Jim. Frank Woodring, is his comic. Frank is his comic. But yeah, he makes an appearance too, which is, I don't know. It was like an interesting kind of dreamlike, comic about meetings, some weird surreal qualities. It's kind of got comics, the business or the various creators. So it's like a weird melange of things. I'm going to use melange because he's a French creator.
Good job.
See, that's my contribution. I'm not very, very Franco.
But then we have, you mentioned that one of the things that stood out to you in this issue of Now is the number of stories or contributions that deal with mental well-being or the inner state. And I think that this contribution in this issue of SOS Suitcases would fit into that. Another one is Walt Holcombe's I Am Bananas. And this is a short comic about his attempts to meditate, because through meditation, he's able to take his mind off of disturbing thoughts. And it seems like most of his disturbing thoughts have to do with defecation. Yeah,
I was going to say, there's a lot of poop in this story.
Yeah. And, it's been a long time since I've seen anything by Walt Holcombe.
I was thinking that too, because like I was saying, I wasn't familiar with most people in this book, but he is one of them. But for work that's been done a long time ago, because he had, what was that book? He did a book in the 90s. Oh, what was his book called? He won an Eisner, didn't he?
Well, he had a series called Poot.
Yeah, he had Poot.
Right, but then he came out with a book in, I think, 2007, Things Just Get Away From You, which is a collection of his various strips. And I can't remember if those were previously collected in Poot or not. But yeah, I mean, that was my first introduction to Walt Holcombe, is that book, Things Just Get Away From You.
Is he the same guy that did, there was a book called King of Persia?
Yeah, he did that as well.
Okay, that's the one I remember, because he won the Eisner for that.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, yeah. So I was like, oh, okay, I know who this is, but maybe he's been wrestling with things. I mean, that's one of the things I thought of. Well, I mean, I don't know what people are doing, because they do industry, or they become illustrators, or there's lots of places where comics people go into.
Yeah. And apparently he is going to be, I just looked this up, in issue number 5 of Now, when that comes out in December. So we can look forward to more Holcombe.
Yeah, it was one of those, like you said, it was like a combination of things. Like, there's definitely a whole lot of pooping, but there's some dream things. There's the meditating things. There's, kind of, those, self-revelatory autobiographies. I like his style. It's very vibrant and, looks like, almost like television cartoons a little bit. but mixed with some Hindu imagery, which I really liked. I like the color scheme. I like the way that he drew his characters, but he's also got these kind of serene double page spreads that went on 86 and 87. I'm thinking about when he finally gets a moment of clarity when things work. Like, that's really beautiful to me, and it juxtaposes very well with the rest of the book, which is a lot more busy and not clear. Or not book, this story. Yeah, that one jumped out at me a lot, too. I'm glad you mentioned that one. For me, one of the ones just visually is that, was it called Clouds or Sky Baby? Sky Baby.
Sky Baby by Julian Glander.
Yeah, that one just visually looks like not things, I mean, it looks like 3D rendering put into comic format.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to call the characters look vaguely Gumby-ish.
Yeah,
but,
they do.
Or Goo. More like Goo, his little sister. So you tune in for your Gumby knowledge here. That one. And actually, what'd you think of Waves? Waves was one on page 61 that really jumped out at me too.
I was just thinking of Waves when you were talking about what struck you about Glander's Sky Baby in terms of the visuals. You know, for me, one of the most striking pieces in this issue of Now is Rebecca W. Kirby's Waves. Mm-hmm. And basically this is a story about a young woman who, when she's out, like running errands or getting things, doing whatever she does, she sees people in a way that, as she describes it, try to see them as if they love her. And so when she sees people in this way and tries to imagine what it would be like if they loved her, it's as if the reality that she's observing becomes, how do you describe this? A little fragmented and flowing. And so there's something quite surreal going on with her inner state as she looks at these people. And so I was really struck at how Kirby is able to take at least her protagonist's inner state and to make it at times almost violent, but not in a negative way. I mean, it's very active, it's very sprawling and flowing. With these images. And so, and it's also very colorful. This is one of the most colorful stories in this issue of Now. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that really stood out to me.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I really tried to make sense of. The whole, you know, when she looks at a person and she tries to think about how they connect, it's like these little rainbow colored, tendrils, fluids, vines. They're all different from different people, which I guess kind of talks about how, you know, maybe you would talk about how people's energies connected, or somehow you make the personal connections. And it's like these weird organic shapes just kind of flow out of everybody, and they're very colorful. And I love how she kind of uses that. But like you said, it's not necessarily pretty or fun. It's like you said, it's somewhat violent. It's invasive maybe, or something. Because it seems like to me, the tone of this is that, you know, maybe she's striving to find relationships, or the character in this is striving to find relationships, but she's not always thrilled with having a relationship, or the situation of being in one, I guess. Because the last two panels, I mean, that's the most protracted fuck I've seen in a comic in a while. It's like a 2-page long, like, fuck. You know, like, it's even longer than that. That's the short version for the podcast. But that's just, you know, that ending, I was like, ooh. And then if you flip the page, it's like a very, just kind of like a smaller single vision of kind of the whole comic, I guess, which I guess that's the capper to it. Which is, yeah, it left me with a lot of questions.
Yeah.
More than any resolution, which, you know, to me, that's a sign of a great story and a great thing in an anthology. Like, there's things I want to unsettle me. There's things I want to make me think, or, you know, be provocative in certain ways. And this, you know, that story definitely does a lot of that on its own.
Yeah. Well, another story that does that is by a fairly regular contributor to Now, and that is Tommi Parrish. Mm-hmm. And this is an untitled piece, but basically it's a story, and it begins on page, 37, where you have a couple who are in bed together, and one says, "I remember dreaming, so I suppose I must have." And they start talking about the dream, then they start talking about other things as well. And it's a rather mundane conversation about this dream and how the two people get along. But then once we get to the second page of this strip or this comic, there is at the bottom of each page, except for the very last and the very first, a 3-panel strip that's in black and white that has, I'm assuming, is the guy in this relationship talking about something that has nothing to do with the comic above, about the dreaming and the couple talking about it. And so when I first read this piece by Parrish, I thought, okay, so this black and white strip at the bottom may be linked to the story proper that is right above it, but it doesn't seem to be. So what I did was, I read everything in order first, and then I went back and read just the comic in color, and then separately I read the black and white strip at the bottom of pages 38 through, I guess, 43. Which kind of tells, in a way, a different story, but it gives us perhaps an insight of the guy who is in the story that's in color. Yeah.
To me, I read it almost like this is like a DVD commentary with the commentary track. Like it's like a movie on the top, and like it's like the real-time relationship on the top, and on the back is like him, interviewed for his reflection on what was going on in their relationship and why it wasn't working, at least on his end.
Right. And, we've talked about many of the pieces that make up Now number 4. I mean, we could go on and maybe devote the entire episode just to the rest of the stories, but there's so much in each issue, not just in the current one of Now. And it's something that I know that we've kind of sang the praises of a number of times on the Comics Alternative. So I guess my way of concluding, if we're going to do that, our discussion of Now number 4 is that this is definitely an anthology that listeners should know about if they aren't already.
Oh, for sure. And like I said, if you're looking for some new creators or just some different kinds of comic sensibility, just seeing the variety of things that are out there, this is a great anthology for that.
Okay, let's get to the last title that we're going to be looking at on this episode, and this is Dick Tracy, Dead or Alive, issue number 1 of what will be a 4-issue miniseries. This is coming out from IDW, and I think it came out maybe 2 weeks ago, a week ago.
I think so. It's a couple weeks ago, I think, at this point.
And the story is by Lee and Michael Allred. The art is by Rich Tommaso. And then Laura Allred does the colors. And so this is basically the Allred family plus Rich Tommaso. And I've been looking forward to this, especially since Heroes Con. When I saw Rich at Heroes Con, he had early illustrations of Dick Tracy. And I think the day that I spoke with him, the first day of the convention, is the day that IDW formally announced the new Dick Tracy miniseries, Dead or Alive.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was there too. And I talked to Rich pretty much every year. And I remember him. Oh yeah, he's awesome. And, awesome is one of my words, apparently. But yeah, and I, like you said, I remember him having those preview pages and they were gorgeous, and I've been looking forward to it. And it just strikes me that, we only have 4 creators to talk about in this book instead of, it's a change of pace from what we've been talking about.
Right. Now, let's start off by letting me ask you, what is your history with Dick Tracy?
I've read various versions. I have a few collections of Chester Gould comics. Mm-hmm. I've read some of the Max Allan Collins, more contemporary ones, the ones that he wrote. And honestly, I think my introduction to Dick Tracy wasn't actually through Dick Tracy. It was through Fearless Fosdick, because I was really into Little Abner comics and getting those collections. And I think Fantagraphics had a Fearless or no, maybe it was Kitchen Sinks back in the 80s, had put out a collection. It was like a die cut cover with like bullet holes in it. And, I didn't know it was a parody. So I kind of came to Dick Tracy in a really roundabout way, but I've read lots of different versions of it.
Yeah. I'm familiar with Dick Tracy, I guess the Gould classic stuff more than anything, but not as familiar with Dick Tracy as I should be, or at least I feel I should be.
I used to read it in the newspaper, as a kid, and I liked, before I knew who Max Allan Collins was, and now, now it's, I like him as a novelist, so there's a part of me that, I've kind of sought out some of them just to kind of see how they've been going once in a while. But this is a different, well, what'd you think about this take compared to what you know about the classic stuff?
I liked it, and one of the things I appreciated about the Allred story, of course, I love Rich's art. And I think that, he's done a lot when it comes to crime or detective or noir narratives. And so as I was talking with him at Heroes a few months ago, it just makes sense that the Allreds would reach out to Rich Tommaso to do this revisitation of the Dick Tracy franchise. But one of the things I appreciated about the story is its cartooniness. And what I mean by that is that there are things that go on in this first issue that strike me as very much like a newspaper strip. Relatively simple action, not necessarily that follows logically, but it's still fun.
Right.
So, yeah, it did strike me as something that you would see in a newspaper strip or series of strips, but in comic book form.
And also a little bit more of it's definitely got a modern sensibility. I mean, because it's set in more contemporary times. I mean, there's hackers and things like that place it in current day. It's not really, I mean, it's got its adult parts to it too, though. I mean, it's like traditional Dick Tracy, like, people do pay the price. There's a lot of, gun violence and, people do die. So it's got stakes to it. But like you said, it's simple in the sense of, you know who the villains are, who the good guys are, or who the good guy is, because it's really one good guy as far as I can tell. And like you said, I'm a big fan of Rich's work, and I've been following him for a long time. And I remember his Recoil comics and a lot of his crime stories. And it's like, this is the kind, and he likes doing period pieces and drawing older style buildings. And so this is almost the book he was born to make in some ways to me, because it's got that kind of design aesthetic of, more of that older style of comics and, the way he draws backgrounds and planes and things like that, but it's set in present day. And I just like, his kind of storytelling and the way the characters look. I mean, I don't think you can go far afield of, Chester Gould's. I mean, it's like Dick Tracy and Batman have like the best rogues galleries ever.
Right.
Visually, like, Chester Gould's that was like his wheelhouse. He could make you some villains, and you knew who they were. You knew what they were up to. You knew their special features just by looking at their faces. You knew that they were bad people, and you knew they had some kind of unique ability or proclivity. Like, he was, not a subtle creator in that sense. But very clear. And I think Rich kind of taps into that. His big boy is, to me, he's sinister.
Yeah.
With that little comb over.
Right. And that's the big bad, right? Big boy.
Mm-hmm.
Who is someone who owns and then corrupts town officials, the mayor, the police chief, and commissioner, all of that.
Oh, yeah. And so, it's to me, that's like Dick Tracy needs a big villain. Yeah. And to me, this book is full of that. And, Big Boy's not necessarily the only one, but, he's going to have adversaries to deal with. And I've done a little bit looking at the previews of this, and There's the multiple covers, which is more of the thing today. But I like the Rich Tommaso ones because each one is it's a mugshot of one of the villains, and the first one is a mugshot of Big Boy. And so future issues will have mugshots of different characters, but they're very, he kind of updates those Chester Gould designs. I know one of them's flat top. But so like, I like that he's taken something old and made it more contemporary. I hope this book finds an audience. That's kind of my thing, because I think it's beautiful. I love crime comics. I know we've talked about that a little bit in the past. To me, this is it's kind of like a underrepresented genre in a lot of ways to me. And, I want a book like this to be successful and to catch on because I want to see more things like it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, that's one of the questions I had for Rich when I saw him at Heroes Con back in June was, if this is a 4-issue miniseries, might there be plans, or at least some kind of tentative plans, to continue this? And, his response was what I more or less expected, if there's enough of an audience for this. Sure. And we'll see. I mean, I think that the title Dick Tracy is enough to draw a lot of comics readers' attention, but is it going to be enough? Yeah.
I mean, I know at my local comic store, he sold through the first issue. I know that because because it's on my pull list there, and I talked about it to him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, they're all gone." And I was like, "Well, that's a good sign."
Mm-hmm. It is, and I'm wondering though. It'd be curious to find out what is selling these issues of Dick Tracy. What are people coming for? So, I mean, it could be just a revisitation of the classic crime fighter Dick Tracy, or it could be that the Allreds are involved, or it could be, along with that, Rich's art. Or it could be a combination of all that stuff.
Yeah, to me, I mean, that's kind of the thing that jumped out at me. I mean, lately, I'm not a big fan of these more they're not creator owned. What are they? The kind of like syndicated characters or licensed characters. That's how I think. Right. I'm not usually a fan of books like that, but this book I am, just because, like you said, I'm a fan of the Allreds. I'm a fan of Rich's, and so to me, it's interesting to see what they want to do with this. And to me, that's kind of the selling point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you have just a combination of really enticing elements, the classic character of Dick Tracy, the Allreds, and Rich Tommaso's art. I think it's kind of a perfect storm of good storytelling, or at least potentially good storytelling. And in this first issue, I mean, I do think that it's successful as a first issue.
Right.
We're introduced to a contemporary version of Dick Tracy. We see him at the very beginning. He arrests a big criminal, but someone who is the most famous man in Silicon Valley. And because of that, the commissioner is upset. Because, a lot of bigwigs are upset now. And so Dick loses his job, but then he is given a job in Chicago. Oh, I don't think it's ever called Chicago.
Right.
Yeah, but
it's the city by the lake.
The city by the lake in the American Midwest, and it's described as a city of broad shoulders and broader girls. So, I mean, it's Chicago. And of course, that's a perfect crime setting. But you have a corrupt mayor, city attorney, police commissioner, and chief. And all of them are basically manipulated by this figure, Big Boy.
Right.
And so Dick Tracy has this task. He has the job, and he immediately goes to work by arresting the people who hired him because they're so corrupt. He did his homework. And again, this is not a spoiler, but what we see happening with Big Boy at the very end of this issue leaves open the possibility for, I guess, the continuation of this miniseries.
Right.
And this is especially apparent in this one-page epilogue, when we're introduced to another character who is described, or at least the insinuation here is the mole within the prison, who actually looks like a mole. I mean, the shape of his head, his nose and all.
It's perfect.
Yes. And we don't know what he is doing with this body of Big Boy. If it indeed is the dead body, we don't know. There's something that goes on at the very end that kind of leaves us in a quandary.
Right. And that's what I liked about this book, because it's kind of got that, ironic setup. Like Big Boy is the most crooked person with everyone in his pocket. So he's going to hire the cleanest cop to, do his, put this illusion of things being above board, and you think things backfire, but you don't know because Big Boy's not an idiot.
Right.
And he might have a plan and things look like they look, but maybe those appearances are deceiving.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing how this series wraps up.
Yeah, me too. I'm definitely going to buy the issues and see where it goes.
Me too.
And I like that the back has process pages too, because I know that for Rich, this is it's a departure in that he's just doing the pencils. And usually he does the inks too, but this is, I like that you get his pencils in the back because I think they're beautiful in and of themselves. Right.
There's also, a little context right before the process pieces, the pencils of Tommaso, where we get, for instance, if someone picked this up, a younger reader, let's say, and had no clue who Dick Tracy was.
Right.
There's a little historical overview and a premise to the series. So, I think it's short, sweet, probably won't be needed by the vast majority of the people who read this, but nonetheless,
sure.
If needed, it's there.
Right. Yeah, they're all... I liked the way this book was put together because it seems to me that was a question I had, whether it would be something that new fans would be able to get into. And I think so. I think that context piece definitely would help if you didn't just get into this story, because I think that, it's told in a lot of ways that these are archetypes. That's the, the clean cop. That's the dirty, ringleader and whatnot. So I think in terms of, something that people could get into, without having a whole lot of background knowledge, I think that this definitely is successful that way. But then even if, you're interested, that little text piece in the back right before the process pages can be real helpful to somebody to kind of introduce to the classics if they so choose to read those.
Mm-hmm, definitely. So there you have it. This week, we looked at 3 recent or relatively recent titles. We started off with issue number 2 of Scratches that is edited by Joost Swarte. And then after that, we looked at Eric Reynolds' edited anthology, Now, which is coming out from Fantagraphics. And then we concluded with an IDW title, issue number 1 of the Allreds and Rich Tommaso's Dick Tracy, Dead or Alive.
Yep, that sounds great.
Yep. So definitely check out all 3 of those. And one of the best places to find comics that are great, like the ones that we just discussed, is by going to the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. That's dcbservice.com.
Yeah, and I didn't say it prior, but they have a whole ton of Dick Tracy comics out there, Chester Gould versions and more contemporary versions, all for 35% off. So go check them out if you want your Dick Tracy fix.
That's right. Yeah, a great place to get caught up on Dick Tracy if you're not and would like to be. And after you do get your Dick Tracy and other titles at dcbservice.com, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you can find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up your phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or you can email us at 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me at Sturge@comicsalternative.com.
Or me at Derek@comicsalternative.com. You can also find us all over social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, and on TuneIn. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
That sounds good. Go check us out.
Please do. And we will be back next week with more recent stuff. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Sturge.
Take care.
See ya.
happened?